Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a closer look. Jeffrey Epstein and his core four, Nadia Marcinkova. Hey, what's going on, everybody? So this is one of the tougher episodes that I've ever recorded, and one of the toughest parts of this case, because the circumstances around Nadia Marcinkova and how she got herself into this situation are sad, to say the least. We're talking about a girl who was sold to Jeffrey Epstein as a child from poor parents in Yugoslavia. She comes over to America, and Jeffrey Epstein begins the whole grooming process, the brainwashing process, etc., etc. And before you know it, as an underaged, basically a sex slave, Nadia Marcinkova is now engaging in abusing other girls that Jeffrey Epstein was bringing around. So it's one of those situations where it's really a touchy situation, in my opinion. It's really hard to go after Marcinkova the same way that you would Kellen Vickers, in my opinion. And that doesn't mean that I absolve Nadia Marcinkova of her role. Absolutely not. If that was the case, we wouldn't even be doing this episode. But what I am cognizant of, and what I am always aware of when it comes to Nadia Marcinkova, is the circumstances that led her into Jeffrey Epstein's orbit. Now, again, that does not mean she is not responsible for the actions that she was involved in when she was an adult, right? The second you become an adult, you're in charge of your actions. Your circumstances as a child, however horrible they may be, are not an excuse for you to engage in abuse as an adult and, continue the cycle. It's not an excuse, and you can't fall back on that and use it as a shield. Now, with that said, I do have empathy because of that situation, and if I was in charge, the judge or whoever, and this case came before me in my chamber, I would probably give Marcinkova half of the time that I would give the other co-conspirators. If she testified against her former cohorts. If she testifies against the Epstein criminal operation and she comes forward and she is truthful, then in my opinion she deserves half of the time that the other co-conspirators deserve, the other core four members deserve, because of the circumstances that led her here. Now, Marcinkova is one of those tragic stories that you see in movies, right? A young girl, 15, from a war-torn land, sold into sex slavery to some rich, creepy-ass old dude. Something right out of the pages of some sick novel. But unfortunately for everybody, this is reality, folks, and we have to discuss it. We have to discuss the situation with Nadia Marcinkova, what her role was, what her background was, and inevitably, what role she can play going forward in bringing justice to everybody that was involved in Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking ring. So we're going to use an article from Wired today to go over Nadia Marcinkova. And this article came out on July 23rd of 2019, and it was published by Wired.com. And it's going to give a background of Nadia Marcinkova. It'll give us a template to work off of so we can discuss who she was, what her role was, etc., etc. And it's important, right? It's important that we remember the context of her situation. It's important that we're cognizant of what she went through, but it's also important that we don't forget those that she helped abuse, right? So we're going to dive into this article and see what they have to say. Headline: The Twisted Flight Paths of Global Girl and the Lolita Express. Model turned pilot Nadia Marcinkova, an alleged accomplice of Jeffrey Epstein, is among a group of girls who came to the Epstein syndicate, presumably by plane from abroad. And we understand that most of the young girls that Jeffrey Epstein brought into his circle were not from abroad, right? They were from local high schools, junior highs, whatever it may be. And they were brought in with promises of money by other young recruiters who had been swooped up into the scheme. And then they went on to be abused by Jeffrey Epstein. Well, Nadia Marcinkova is a different case. This is a girl who was imported from a foreign land, a different continent, and she was brought here with one goal in mind, with one purpose: to be used by that sick, disgusting bastard, Jeffrey Epstein. This article was written by... One second here. There's no... Oh, excuse me. The author is Virginia Heffernan, is the one who wrote the article. The Gulfstream girl can't use that nickname anymore. In 2013, the model turned pilot, then 27, blonde, often beaming in photos, was hit with a trademark infringement suit by Gulfstream Aerospace, which told her its brand name was off limits. And you see a trend here, right? How many of these girls that ended up with Epstein, Marcinkova, Maxwell, etc., ended up getting their pilot's license, ended up flying helicopters, ended up being able to captain submersibles? It's a trend, and there was a reason for it. Because once you were in Jeffrey Epstein's circle, he wanted to squeeze you for every last bit that he could. And if it meant sending you to become a pilot, perfect. He has another pilot now that'll keep his secrets. And again, it was all about the long game with these people. That must have been a disappointment. As a commercial pilot, the former Gulfstream girl, whose real name is Nadia Marcinkova, and before that, Nadia Marcinkova, holds 3 rating certificates for single-engine aircraft, multi-engine aircraft, and various Gulfstream business jets, which have their own rating certificates. Furthermore, she is the CEO of Avaloop, a supremely odd aviation branding business whose website features flawless shots of her with Gulfstreams. Well, I guess it's nice, right? It's nice that she's having such a great life. Considering what the survivors are dealing with, must be nice to have a bunch of pilots' licenses, hop on a Gulfstream, take pictures, call yourself the Gulfstream girl. Meanwhile, all these other girls whose lives that you had part in destroying are fighting, clawing, using tooth and nail to get some justice. Marcinkova was a good sport about losing her old handle. In the Miami Herald last year, Julie Brown reported that Marcinkova was brought to the U.S. from the former Yugoslavia to live with an abusive man more than 30 years her senior when she was 15. Again, that's what I'm talking about, folks, right? That statement alone right there sends shivers down my spine. The fact that this girl was purchased from her parents and brought here to be abused in the country that I love by somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, and it was ignored for so long, it really fires me up. It really, really fires me up. There's no excuse for it. There's no place for it. Human beings aren't a commodity to be bought and sold. Human beings aren't just pieces of flesh. It's not hard to imagine she's adept at survival. Moreover, as an aerobatic pilot, she's stylish and dashing. In a video from March 2018, taken down just last week, she flips a Pitts S2B and then eats a donut hanging from a ribbon while upside down in the cockpit. In materials for Avaloop, she now calls herself Global Girl. Look, again, this is a hard one for me, right? I want to say, all right, hey, that's great. She's made a comeback, blah, 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 blah. She's this great pilot. But at the same time, you know what she was involved in. You know who she was helping out. And the second I want to go doom and gloom on her, again, I think about a 15-year-old girl coming here from Yugoslavia, and it stems the machine gun fire coming from my mouth. Marcinkova brings to mind the opening of Vladimir Nabokov's novel of child rape. She was low, plain, low in the morning. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was my Dolores on the dotted line. But in my arms, she was always Lolita. which makes sense as the airplane that would later help shape Marcinko's life in America, a large cabin Boeing 727, now associated with both high glamour and incomprehensible suffering, was known as the Lolita Express. It belonged to Jeffrey Epstein. This whole story is just disturbing. This whole entire Nadia Marcinkova angle is disturbing as disturbing could be. And the whole entire Nabokov comparisons are right on. You know, it's one of those situations where it's hard to wrap my mind around this whole Nadia Marcinkova situation, honestly, folks. It really is. You know, usually I come into these, especially these sorts of episodes, and I'm ready to go double barrel and let loose. But I try to be mindful of Marcinkova here. But as we learn more about what she did, it's hard to be mindful of it, right? You know, it's really a tightrope, and it's really a difficult balancing act reporting on this part of the story, in my opinion. Nadia Marcinkova, by that name, first appeared in court documents in Florida about a decade ago. She was 22 then and had been in the U.S. since 2000. She is one of the most prominent immigrants in the circle of Epstein, the accused child rapist and registered sex offender who was arrested on sex trafficking charges at Teterboro Airport on July 6th. Unlike the hundreds of young girls who, according to testimony in court documents, were lured by Epstein and his surrogates to his mansions from Florida trailer parks, Manhattan high schools, and Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort, Marcinko belonged to a smaller group who came to the Epstein syndicate, presumably by plane, from abroad. An attorney who represented Epstein's alleged victims described Nadia Marcinkova as Epstein's live-in sex slave in a Florida court filing. Several girls told the Palm Beach police that, later in the aughts, Marchenko pressured them to have sex with both her and Epstein. And there's the rub, folks, right? There's where we get into the problem. At what point do we forget that she was abused herself and brought over here as a sex slave as we pursue justice for the other survivors? It's a very sticky situation, a very tough one to break down, and to be honest with you, I don't have the legal mind to figure it out, right? All I can do is analyze. But as far as having an answer for you on you know, the legal side of this, I really don't even know how something like this would be dealt with from a legal standpoint if you're a prosecutor. Through the years, Epstein has maintained a fleet of aircraft that has included a Gulfstream 4, a Gulfstream GVSP, a helicopter, and the Lolita Express, which seated nearly 200 people. In the aughts, when Epstein logged some 600 hours of flight time per year, New York Magazine reported that he flew so much because he was scouting investment opportunities. Yeah, right. He was scouting recruitment opportunities, bringing young girls from abroad into his operation, or finding young models who were desperate to get a big break. Investment opportunities, please. Nobody was investing with Jeffrey Epstein unless they were trying to launder their money. Give me a break. Before he landed in jail this month, Epstein's private jets were still crisscrossing the planet about every third day. An employee at an airstrip in St. Thomas, close to Epstein's 70-acre property in the Virgin Islands, which is nicknamed Pedophile Island, told Holly Aguirre of Vanity Fair that Epstein could often be seen getting out of his helicopter and boarding his jet with children, female children. The employee expressed disbelief and disgust that Epstein, a convicted sex offender, could move around so easily. And I heard the same thing from my source in New Mexico who worked at the airport and said the same exact thing about Epstein. Young little girls, they looked like kids. Everybody knew the deal, and nobody did a thing. Everybody turned the other way. Now imagine if they would have listened to Maria Farmer and Annie Farmer, Nadia Marcinkova would have never been in this country. Though Epstein exploits an obscure federal policy that lets private owners hide their movements from the public record, the manifests from hundreds of flights are available, and they clearly show names of celebrities from Alan Dershowitz, I kept my underwear on so I'm innocent, to Bill Clinton linked to Epstein. Marcinko's flights are somewhat harder to pin down. as girls in Epstein's circle were often recorded only by first names or initials. And that was a way for them to try and skew anybody on the outside looking in from knowing what the deal was, or that there were underage girls aboard the plane, or that there were girls who were being trafficked aboard the plane. So it wasn't just Epstein, right? The pilots had to be in on it. Larry Visosky had to be in on it. Everybody involved in the flights, they all had to be in on it. At the very least, they knew what was going on. The name Nadia appears in 2003, and Nadia Marcinkova appears on a manifest for a flight out of Palm Beach in 2004. Then NM starts to show up on nearly every manifest for both one of the Gulf Streams and the Lolita Express. Yeah, look, she was a big part of this, right? And there was a reason that Epstein paid for her to become a pilot, trained her to become a pilot. It's because of secrecy. He knew he could trust her. He groomed her, he brainwashed her, and he knew that she was a trusted associate and she could be trusted to fly these planes and be involved in whatever sort of scheme or plot Epstein was up to without running her mouth. While NM was generally noted zipping among airports in Palm Beach, Florida, Monterey, California, and New York, she also visited Columbus, Ohio, Newfoundland, and Terceira Island in the Azores. A pilot for Epstein testified that Marcinko had flown with Epstein hundreds of times. The available manifests record no flight of NM to Bratislava or anywhere in Slovakia, which Marcinko told a Plane Enthusiast magazine was her home country. And that's sad too, right? She has the ability to fly wherever she wants, to go wherever she wants, and she doesn't do it. She doesn't fly to her own home country. Probably has to do with the fact that her parents sold her to Jeffrey Epstein. Why would you ever want to go back and see them, right? And because the manifests from 2000 are not available, it's still not clear whether she left home in an Epstein plane. On March 22, 2019, though, Epstein's Gulfstream GVSP flew from Paris to Bratislava and returned 5 hours later. That's interesting. That's very interesting. I wonder if she had flown to maybe try and reconnect with her parents. I don't know. I mean, you would think that if your parents sold you to Jeffrey Epstein, the last thing you'd want to do is go in and talk to them, unless you were going to like set their house on fire or something. I don't know how anyone could want to have a conversation with another person, parent or not, who sells you basically into slavery, unless it's going to be a fiery-ass conversation. Marcinko is one of 4 alleged accomplices of Epstein who were given immunity from prosecution in 2008. That was the year that Epstein was convicted of 1 count of solicitation and another of procuring a girl under 18 for prostitution. Again, a minor cannot be a prostitute. You cannot solicit a minor for sex. Okay, there's no such thing as an underage prostitute. All right, all that is a child being raped and abused by sick-ass perverts. For this, of course, he was given a nauseatingly light sentence with extensive work release, during which, as the lawyer for several of Epstein's survivors alleged this week, he continued to have improper sexual contact with young women. And we know this is factual. We know that while Epstein was out on his stupid-ass little work release journeys, he was still abusing girls. He was still running his criminal empire. And that's what it was, folks. Don't be fooled. It was a criminal empire. That's what he was doing while he was out on that weak-ass work release that the Florida state prosecutor slapped on him. Isn't that nice? The lax sentence and the immunities were part of the deal Epstein got from Alex Acosta, who was then the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida and was until July 19th Donald Trump's Secretary of Labor. Acosta resigned the post amid the furor over his leniency with Epstein. And while I believe that it's a good thing that Acosta was fired, right, and that he had to go, there are a lot of other people that should have been fired as well. What about the prosecutors? What about the people who were involved in getting him this cushy deal? The other people, the actual state prosecutors who prosecuted the case. Why weren't they censured? Why weren't they fired? Why didn't they have to answer for their actions? After Epstein was arrested this month, federal prosecutors further alleged that Epstein paid two people whom investigators identified as co-conspirators hundreds of thousands of dollars in 2008, seemingly to keep them quiet. The cash recipients weren't named, but it's not unreasonable to infer that one of them could be Marcinkova. And we know that it was more than that. We know that he paid all of these, the core four, $200,000 at least each. They all had spending accounts. They all had the ability to go get their hair done. They all went to Le Cirque to eat whenever they wanted, etc., etc. And we know that that's factual for sure. And we know that the reason he was giving them that money was to pay for their silence. Epstein wasn't some altruistic man who was just throwing money around because that's what he wanted to do. Everything he did was calculated. When he was giving these girls this money, these ladies this money, it was to, so they would not talk. It was another layer of security for him, another layer of armor to keep him out of trouble. Among the co-conspirators who were given immunity back then, and who might have been paid off by Epstein, is Sarah Kellen, a regular on Epstein's flights who was accused by lawyers in court filings of bringing girls to Epstein's mansion to be abused. Leslie Groff is another co-conspirator, an alleged sex scheduler in Epstein's ring who is said to have coordinated travel with young girls. And we've established that already, right? We've already established the fact that Leslie Groff was, another sicko. And all of the core four have a lot to answer for. They have a lot to answer for. They have a lot of questions that they need to answer. And they need to all be swooped up, arrested, and interrogated. With the sex trafficking case, neutral language can become sinister. For instance, there sure is a lot of ominous bringing in this story with girls as the verb's direct objects. Is bringing, when it comes to unaccompanied minors, also kidnapping, trafficking, or even enslaving? That's a good question, and I think it's all of that. I think it is definitely all of that. And again, the few charges that were thrown against Epstein were all weak as hell. None were the slam dunk, smash in the face charge that he should have gotten. And we all, look, at this point, I've established it here. This is a RICO case if there's ever been one. And the fact that no RICO charges have been slapped on any of these clowns, it's enough to make your head explode. Was the travel Groff reportedly coordinated international to the U.S., maybe on commercial flights? Was it consensual? An attorney for Groff says his client never knowingly booked travel for anyone under the age of 18 and had no knowledge of the alleged illegal activity whatsoever. That's a lie. I don't believe one word of that. We've already established that with Groff's episode. Federal prosecutors untangling the Epstein web are going to have a lot of flight paths to study, and perhaps one day we will see a map of a modern-day slave trade connecting points east and south like Slovakia and Ecuador with Palm Beach, New York City, and perhaps some of Epstein's other hangouts and redoubts, including Columbus, Ohio, and New Mexico. Yeah, look. There's no doubt that there's connections, right? There's no doubt that this man was a prolific human trafficker. And there's no doubt that the girls who were helping him all played a serious role within this trafficking ring. Finally, among the alleged co-conspirators, there's another immigrant, Adriana Ross, a former model from Poland whom Epstein supposedly hired in 2002 to set up what the court document refers to as sex sessions in Florida. It's not clear whether Epstein and his recruiters first encountered Ross in the U.S. or Poland, but according to flight logs, Ross is one of the people in Epstein's circle who flew most frequently with Bill Clinton. That's interesting, of course, right? So again, nobody's ever charged Bill Clinton with anything in this case. Nobody's ever said that Bill Clinton was abusing girls or anything like that. But don't you think it's important that we hear from Adriana Ross as well? What does she know about this case? What does she know about Clinton? What does she know about his activities with Epstein? She also appeared by Epstein's side in Manhattan at a magazine launch party in 2005. Ross refused to answer questions about Epstein in 2010. That's all of them. They've all refused to answer the questions, right? But as far as Marcinkova goes, that chapter of her life, her teens and early 20s when she was rolling with Ross, Kellen, and Groff, seems long past. According to the Washington Post, she's not taking calls from reporters. Of course she's not. Just like Prince Andrew, she doesn't want to incriminate herself. She knows what she did was wrong. She understands now as an adult what she did was wrong. And that's where I'm torn, right? because you can't really blame her for what was happening when she was a teenager and Jeffrey Epstein had enslaved her. But after the fact, when she became an adult and she had the ability to go anywhere, she had those planes, she could have went anywhere, told the authorities, asked for help. She didn't do any of that. She didn't come forward and say Epstein's abusing these young girls. So, it's definitely one of those things where I go back and forth. Sometimes I want to see, I'm like, you know what, forget it. She needs to get as much time as the other girls. But then when I sit down and I'm more calm about things and I'm reading through things, to me, it's a situation where she should get half the time. Half the time as the other people. She has to do sometimes. She has to be punished for her role, but I don't think her punishment should be as severe as someone like Leslie Groff, who came in with eyes wide open. For this story, I tried to reach her through LinkedIn, YouTube, and other social media, as well as through a few of her friends. I heard nothing back. Her LinkedIn resume no longer mentions her work for Epstein's outfit. Of course not. Now she's trying to shed all of that, right? She's trying to shed all of that and, come out of the shadow that Epstein cast over her. Well, the one guaranteed way to do that, and the one way to get people to start looking at you as more of a victim or a survivor of Epstein as opposed to a co-conspirator, is to come forward. Speak to the authorities. Speak out about what you know. Go on record. But instead, she still hides. Instead, she's still avoiding the situation, as if it's just going to go away. It is not going to go away, Nadia. Come forward. Tell everybody what the other co-conspirators were up to. Help prosecute these people who put you in this situation in the first place. In one deposition, she declined to answer questions. Nadia now uses Marcinko, a revision of the name in the 2008 indictment. She's the elusive global girl in the skies, and Nadia Marcinko here on Earth. On Earth she was, and may still be, ensconced in an office in a posh building at 301 East 66th Street, not far from Epstein's House of Horrors at 9 East 71st Street, where the FBI, after Epstein's arrest on sex trafficking charges, found child porn, piles of cash, a fake passport that claimed Epstein lived in Saudi Arabia, and God knows what else. Look, again, where is all of that stuff, right? They got all this evidence. Child porn, piles of cash, fake passports, and no arrests. The only people who were arrested are the 2 prison guards still. Can you imagine, folks? Just chew on that for a minute and see how disgusting it tastes. The company of Mark Epstein, Jeffrey's brother, owns a majority stake in the building on 66th Street, including the unit Marcinko apparently lived or lives in. We also know that Kellen Vickers had a place there. We know that just about all of these people had apartments there. Indike had an apartment there, etc., etc. So a lot more needs to be done about the money aspect here, about where Mark Epstein got the funds to purchase this building, and if it had anything to do with Jeffrey Epstein. Well, you know how I feel about it. All of it needs to be seized. This is another place that should be seized and sold off, and the proceeds should go to the survivors. Mark says he has never heard of Avaloop, which was registered at that building for at least 7 years. As recently as 2015, Sarah Kellen took deliveries at the same building. Folks, look, for anyone to try and come out and say that these core 4 weren't deeply involved with Epstein and weren't completely committed to the cause, those are people that haven't been following the case. Those are people that have no idea what they're talking about. The core 4 played such a crucial role in the carrying out of the crimes, in the making sure things ran smoothly within the criminal enterprise, making sure that all the gears were going at the same pace and nothing was grinding. And Nadia Marcinkova was a big part of that as well. And she needs to come forward. She needs to talk to the authorities, and her only way out, as far as I can see, is if she turns state's evidence and rats the rest of the co-conspirators out. Because short of that, when the walls come down, if she still hasn't come forward to talk, then I don't know. I don't even know if the prosecutors will take into account her past circumstances. They might be looking for a scorched earth Machiavellian outcome here. And if that's the case, Marcinkova is doing herself no favors right now by not coming forward. So in spite of the immunity and the name changes, maybe Marcinko is not as far out of the gravitational pull of Epstein's world as she might want to be, especially with Epstein back in the news. Marcinko's story is her own, though, and with Epstein facing new charges, her testimony could be invaluable. Right here, it says it right here as well in the article. That's what I think. That's the route I would go for if I was a prosecutor. You don't want to look like you don't care about her previous circumstances, and I feel the same way because I do have pity for her, and I do have empathy for what she went through. But unless she cooperates, unless she comes forward and she tells everybody what she knows and what she was involved in, and she takes responsibility for the part she played, then I don't see how you can be lenient with her. I think you have to throw the book at her. You have to set an example. After all, among the numberless women and girls who have come forward saying they were raped and enslaved by Epstein and his syndicate, she and the other alleged co-conspirators could belong to a subset who may have started out as victims and ended up as possible abusers. I definitely agree with that when it comes to Nadia, obviously, but the other three, I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. The other three came in with their eyes wide open, and it'll take a serious amount of evidence to prove to me that that isn't the case. Victims have testified that Marcinko was central to Epstein's recruitment strategies and often joined in the abuse. And there is the rub, right? Every time I say, I want to, she should get half the time, I think about the abuse. And then I bounce over to the other side and I say, man, let's throw the book at her. So again, it's a tightrope act, and we need all of the information on the table. We need her to come forward, and she needs to speak on the record about what occurred. Because I'll tell you what, it's going to be hard for her to try and get any sort of sympathy or empathy from a jury, even if it goes that far, right? Because she's not taking responsibility for the part that she played. Instead, she's just ignoring it all. And we all know that ignoring something like this doesn't make it go away. Her story also suggests a possible connection between the indentured girls who say they were brutalized by the Epstein syndicate and a part of the global transportation infrastructure of human trafficking. It's important too, because there's a lot of that here. We know that Jean-Luc Brunel was instrumental in a lot of the shipping of girls from Europe to Jeffrey Epstein, but there were other people. I'm sure Epstein was involved with other trafficking rings, because it's naive to think that there aren't other trafficking rings operating in the same manner. Maybe not at the same level, but certainly in the same manner. So again, who was Epstein working with? Who were his contacts in Europe? Who were his contacts in Asia? And why is this stuff not being pursued? There should be a dragnet cast over anyone who has ever come in contact with Jeffrey Epstein. If Epstein's arrest really does lead to a sustained effort to break the back of international sex slave trade, government should monitor more closely the use of Gulfstreams and Boeings to oligarchs and their cutouts, for sure. The same rules of commercial flight should go with private flight. Why do these people who have a couple of bucks extra dough in their pocket, a bigger bank account, deserve extra privacy? Sorry, you don't. You should have the same rules as me when I'm hopping on coach and being stuffed into the back of one of those planes. Because obviously, you mofos can't conduct yourselves right. Obviously, you're trafficking in little girls and weapons and God knows what else. So, time to put the clamps down on them. Time for some oversight. They're also going to have to crack down on planes full of human cargo, complicit private airports, and the extensive brutality, inhumanity, and complicity of some in this corporate jet set. Look, we know that there's a lot of this going on. We know, look, it's naive to believe that human trafficking isn't a prevalent situation around the world. It is. And we know that a lot of these people who are involved in it are very rich people. So these airports that facilitate it, the people that facilitate it, everything that goes around when it comes to this situation, everything surrounding it, every one of these people that are involved, they're enablers. They need to answer questions. And these airports that are prolific for this, like Teterboro, they need to be completely and utterly looked at. because there is no way that people in these airports don't know the deal, that they don't know what's going on. Did Nadia at 15 run away with Epstein or a recruiter? Was she, as alleged, actually purchased as a slave? And from whom? For how much? In what currency? With what trace of the transaction? That's important stuff too. We don't have any of that, right? We have none of that evidence. We have none of that information, so we don't know. Purely speculative. We're purely speculating when it comes to this right now, because all we have to go on is the little bit of information about her that's in the public eye. And we know how secretive Jeffrey Epstein is. We know that Marcinkova herself has changed her name several times, and it's very hard to trace this down and find out the root, where she's from, how they got their hands on her, etc., etc. And again, that's why it's important for her to come forward. She needs to come forward, she needs to talk on the record, and she needs to set this all straight. Because the role that she played is a very serious role. And if she's not willing to come forward, and she's not willing to help the case, and she's not willing to roll over on her co-conspirators, then I'm sorry, but she's going to have to face the music, just like Kellen, just like Groff, just like Ross, just like Maxwell. Anything short of her fully cooperating is enough for her to get the whole entire book thrown at her, in my opinion. What did the future Avatrix feel at 15 on her way to the U.S.? Was she taking her first of many rides in a private jet? Was there a hastily arranged passport? Did other girls fly with her? Global Girls site for Avaloop says that, after modeling, Marcinko turned to aviation because she was ready for longer runways. Maybe so. And maybe after being brought from home into sex slavery and then brought to parties and seemingly brought to her alleged role as a rape facilitator, Marcinko wanted to pilot her own life for a change. That could be possible as well, right? Look, I'm not going to try and get into the psychology of Nadia Marcinko. I don't know her. I only know what I've read about her. So I'm not going to even get into that kind of stuff. But what it looks like to me is that she was steered upon this path by Epstein for the reasons I mentioned earlier. She could be trusted. He knew that he had her brainwashed. He knew that she was groomed correctly to how he wanted her. And he also knew that she was so brainwashed that she would do whatever he asked. So in my opinion, that's why she became a pilot. But in videos for Avaloop, she seems only to fly around white-hair old men. And it's hard to imagine her truly dazzling smiles don't conceal something else. It's all too sad, and anyone who is said to have entered bondage at 15 and was forced to act as a sex slave deserves much, much better. Folks, that was, the Marcinkova part of this story is probably the hardest one for me to break down and to analyze as we read through these articles. Because it's hard. It's hard when you have a girl who was sold into slavery. It's just a difficult thing. But at the same time, we have to stand firm, and we have to remember the survivors in all of this. They didn't choose to be there either. They didn't choose to be abused by Nadia Marcinkova. They didn't choose for Jeffrey Epstein to rape them and traffic them. So, in my opinion, the only way that Marcinkova can avoid the full weight of the law is for her to come forward, testify, and help the survivors get the justice that they deserve. And even after that, she has to do some time, unfortunately, for her. Because it's the only way, right? She can't skate. Unless, of course, they work out some deal and she can give them Prince Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell, then maybe a suspended sentence or something. But short of that, Marcinkova has to be punished, unfortunately, for her role. The difference, in my opinion, is the fact that she was groomed for this, that she was purchased as a young girl and brought into this world. So with that in mind, half the time, if she cooperates. If not, then it has to be an all-out blitz to bring her down with the rest of the other core four. All right, everybody, so that concludes episode 4 of our core 4 series. One more episode will follow this, and that will be episode 5, and that will deal with Adriana Ross. You can expect that one out sometime in the middle of this week. If you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. Also, if you haven't checked out my newest podcast yet, you'll be able to find the link for that in the description box. It's called COVID-19, the Pandemic That Changed Everything. All right, everybody, I will be back later on tonight with our usual daily drop. I hope you all have an amazing day.